There are so many things in the modern world that keep our brains enthralled, but our hearts still feel empty. The Buddhists, they love to say this thing, your emotions are like the waves on the ocean, but your center is actually the depth of the ocean. And the depth of the ocean is what we're after with deep happiness.
I think that dogma is the end of life, honestly. I think you are brain dead if you are trapped inside of a dogma.
Especially with the internet, you really need to follow widely, get into deep conversations with people who you don't agree with.
You got to let people you utterly despise say what they want to say too, or you're not really for free speech.
When people are stressed, their mind gets kind of narrow and they can only think about the one thing they're stressed about. But a really uncompressed person, usually a hiker, a ski bum, a Buddhist monk, the world is totally open to them, right?
Well, hello, everyone. It's Jim O'Shaughnessy with another episode of Infinite Loops. Today, I have a very special guest because, number one, I've been trying, and it's been my fault that I've had to switch this recording many, many times, to have a good long chat with Will Schoder, who is a video essayist who uses a variety of popular culture and books and all sorts of things that guess who's interested in? Yeah, that would be me, to make really, really great both short and long form essays via video. Well, welcome.
Thanks, Jim. It's great to be here. Big fan.
Big fan of yours. I was rewatching some of your videos and noted that some of the short form ones, like they're as short as a little under 10 minutes. Then you shifted over to the series on happiness. Hopefully, we're going to talk about all of these. The series on happiness is long form. So I guess my first question is, when you were having so much success with the short form, why did you bump over to long form?
I've been asked that question many times by fans who are wondering the same questions. I was so interested in the topic of happiness that I stopped caring about the potential success in terms of views that it might have. And I wanted to go all in on something that I was super interested in. And once I got into it, I realized it had to be long form in order to do it justice. And that's how it ended up being long form. I know that it was probably going to be less successful than my other content because short form just tends to do better. But I just went forward with what I wanted to do.
Which is something I do to excess, according to everyone in my family. So I can totally get behind that. Did you find that it materially impacted either your hardcore fans or people who might have just stumbled upon your channel and really got hooked? Because you did one on the attention economy, which we're also going to talk about. So you got their attention. Did you find that it transferred over to the longer form?
Yeah, there is a large thirst out there for long form content, and there's plenty of people who want it, and those types of people are looking for it, and they do find you, and when they find you, they want to support you. And so actually, when I first released the Happiness series, my paid support went up like 300%.
Wow.
But yes, the views definitely went way down because there's just not as many people who are interested in an hour-long video. But yes, the strength of the closer community and the people who are interested in that stuff got stronger for sure.
That's kind of along the lines of the 1,000 true fans, right?
100%.
It's like this podcast is, I break every single rule that, that they let, 10 things you must do to have a successful podcast. And like, I had a friend ask me, did you intentionally go through that list and do the opposite to each one? But, I think that unless you want to be, a pop star or, I Love Lucy, whatever. Like, it's my opinion that you're going to find your audience. And I think the metric you cited there is really telling. Your paid went up 300%. Your views went way down. That's Mr. Pareto writ large.
100%. It was a choice that I knew I had to make because the video essay genre is so effort intensive and takes so long to make that you just need to take the time and have paid support because you're not releasing enough content to, make enough off ad revenue alone.
Yeah. And one of the things that I want to jump into now is one of the reasons why we're doing this. Like when I found you, it was like catnip for me because like you seem to love all the same things that I love. And I love the way you weave together both popular culture, like you use Rick and Morty, you look at the effects of cartoons on satire. Again, I watched maybe way too many cartoons. Pre-war Warner Brothers were my favorite.
Interesting.
But then you also bring in like the heavy hitter philosophers, the heavy hitter philosophies that they contend for. And the first one that I saw of yours was actually sent to me by a colleague, and it was your short on 8 books that changed your life. And when I watched it, I'm like, oh, wait a minute. These 8 books changed my life too. What was it just you were sitting there and reading one of them and you thought, you know what, God damn it, I'm going to do something on the other books as well.
Yeah, I think part of it was my audience are voracious readers, and so they want to know what I was reading. That was part of it. And then sort of the way I founded the channel in the first place was this idea behind sort of paradigm shifts that sort of lift a weight off your shoulders or release you from a cage you didn't think you were in. And the reason I chose those books is because each of those books kind of did that for me. They really sort of just, bended my brain in a way that I came out of them a completely different person. And that's why I chose them. And I would say of the 8 that I chose, The Righteous Mind really sticks out as the one that really just totally changed the way I saw the world. But they all did. But The Righteous Mind really sticks out.
Yeah. So let's go right to The Righteous Mind then. And I think one of your comments was the most dangerous thing in the world is dogma. And that comes right out of The Righteous Mind. That is something with which the vehemence with which you said that I share. I think that dogma is the end of life. Honestly, I think you are brain dead if you are trapped inside of a dogma, because you literally can't see or think about anything else other than the prescribed way. But you're going to be far more eloquent than I on this. So to tell everyone listening and watching why that particular one was the one that really changed your life.
Well, I think for me, I came from fairly elite schooling, and I had definitely felt in a very progressive dogma. And Jonathan Haidt gives this great TED Talk where he asks the TED audience, how many of you are on the left? How many of you are libertarians? How many are on the right? And pretty much everybody in the audience raises their hand and says they're on the left. And he says, this is a problem because we don't understand each other. We're just in our sort of sections. And he talks about how a lot of changing people's minds has to do with actually getting to know people. And if you're just arguing with an avatar online or sort of writing someone off immediately, you're not actually seeing the world clearly. And you're blinded to how a lot of other people see the world. And he explains this really well through his moral foundations theory. And it just really sort of opened my brain up to a whole different world of perspectives and things like that I feel like I had written off for much of my life.
Yeah. And the Robert Anton Wilson, who is an author I love, I think he was maybe on many things 50 years ahead of his time, stole the term from Timothy Leary, reality tunnels. And he writes very extensively on how these reality tunnels literally blind us, truly blind us to what other people see when they have their reality goggles on, right? And that really affected me in much the way that Haidt's book affected you. I've read the book and liked it as well. And I just wonder, it's something that I see people increasingly dancing around for the first time. Like, man, this tribalism is now getting out of hand. It is now getting to the point where literally, if you look at certain ideologies, they will not consider even befriending someone who has a different viewpoint than they. And I think that, there's a lot of reasons for the cause of it. One of them is modern technology itself. Like, if you had some kind of bizarre, kind of niche reality tunnel, and you lived in, Iowa, and it was 1950, well, you were just the weird kid. But now it doesn't matter where you live. You'll find all the other weird kids on the internet who have that particular reality tunnel, and then you'll join it. It will become an echo chamber, and you'll reinforce each other's ideas. And, it's just, and so on, and so on, and so on. What's your prescription for breaking out of it?
I really think you just, especially with the internet, you really need to follow widely, is one remedy to it. And another is to get into deep conversations with people who, you don't agree with. I actually think podcasts have been amazing tools for just wider culture because of this, especially ones that bring on people who disagree. And, you might not change your mind in the middle of listening to a podcast, but perhaps afterwards, as you mull on it and listen to the debate that you just heard in your head, you might change your mind. And I think podcasts actually have done a lot for that. Following widely on Twitter and listening widely. And it's pretty hard in the real world to seek out, people who think differently than you. But if you can, power to you. That's awesome.
Yeah, I agree with all of those. I follow many accounts on social media where I know that they are going to be espousing things that I really, really disagree with. And it's helpful. But I actually wrote a multi-series thread on Twitter called The Thinker and the Prover on this very idea. And I got it from Robert Anton Wilson. Whereby what he says is, your thinker can think anything it wants, right? That you could think that the U.S. is the greatest country in the world, or it's a colonializer of all of the other countries. You could think that free markets are the best thing in the world, or that collectives, kibbutzes, are going to be the way to the future. But then the point that gets made that I think is very helpful is, once the thinker latches on to one of those ideas, the thinker shuts down and the prover takes over. And the prover is just our subconscious saying, oh, you believe that baseball is the national sport of America? Okay, I'm going to reinforce that idea with everything you see, everything you consume, everything. And literally, some proponents of this say, blinds you to all of the contrary evidence. I mean, literally, it is invisible to you. So another thing that I started to do was I would try to take an argument I didn't think was right and steel man it. In other words, I would go and I would try to insert myself in that reality tunnel and said, okay, I'm a Marxist who believes that free markets are exploitation, and now let's steal that. And what's interesting about it is what you do find, and I want to get your opinion on this, is that it is not the entirety of the other argument that you're disagreeing with that's wrong. In fact, many times there's a lot of things in it that are right. And when you do that, you start to think, and you try to introduce something that many maintain things as they currently are have killed, and that's nuance and context and perspective. What do you think?
I think that's absolutely true. And a rule that I live by is that there are very few, if any, arguments in life where someone is not a little bit right and a little bit wrong. It's very rare to be in a discussion with someone that's totally wrong and someone else is totally right. It's exceedingly rare. And so I think the reason why dogma is so dangerous is because you don't get to pick up on the nuances of the other person and the places where they might be right. You've already framed it as completely wrong from the start. So, yeah, I definitely think that it's so important to recognize that you are wrong in some places and they are right in some places in every argument you get into.
Yeah. And one of the things that I've gotten in the habit of prefacing many statements of opinion with, hey, I'm probably wrong, but
yeah.
Because
That's
actually you're saying it to yourself, right? And so you're kind of preconditioning yourself to not like, I always make fun of the people who put shit up on social media saying, this is the hill I will die on. And I always respond with exactly the same response. And I say, I subscribe to the George S. Patton school of making the other poor dumb bastards die on their hills. But I wonder,
That's a great quote.
I wonder, is it just that that because I was rereading another guy I love, Jed McKenna, who's himself a fictional character, and he's housed under spirituality, but he ain't about spirituality. He's much more about like, no, this is the way the world really works. And he was saying, if you really want to destroy a people, you just want to fucking decimate a decent group of people and make them turn into barbarians, fuck with their belief systems and their belief structures. And then, you think of Alexander, every time he conquered somewhere, he left generals there. And he said, you marry the locals, you worship their gods, you learn their language and all of those things. And like how brilliant that was, right? Because they weren't coming in and inserting Macedonian complete rule or totality. Yeah. And do you think there's a way out? Do you think that the same tools that maybe have in essence captured us can liberate us?
100%. And I actually see it happening. If I just compare the way we talk now versus, I think like 2016, 2017, it's much healthier. I think maybe people would disagree with me, but I find that there's way more open-minded people than there were just, 8 years ago. So I think it is currently getting better. And relatively speaking, the internet is still an extremely new tool. And we're still in the midst of sort of, as you say on this podcast, a great reshuffling. Part of that is reshuffling the internet, and figuring out how it works, how it can best serve us, rather.
And so, do you have some ideas about that? What would you do if I made you internet czar? I hate czars, by the way, but if I made you an internet czar, what would you do to further that?
That is a tough question. I think we need to be more exploratory than the ad model. The incentives on the internet are such that they can really cause you to create a lot of devil's bargains where, the only way to get attention and money is a particular way of acting. And I think we need to explore potentially different monetary incentive models. I know that's really tricky, but I would love to see some more experimentation there. Some people think crypto can do it. I'm not sure about that yet. There have been the rise of things like Substack, and I know X just started paying, but that's still based on the ad model. So yeah, something with the ad model I'd be really interested in. But I can't really, this is not my expertise, and I'm not sure what that would look like.
The thing that I think is helpful is, as you mentioned, the number of unique voices that now can find platforms is larger than it has ever been in human history. And to understand how important and how fundamentally what a quantum jump that is. Read Bill Bryson's America One Summer, I think 1921 is the full title of the book, in which he recounts that when Lindbergh landed back here in the United States after flying across the ocean, the guy who was speaking on the radio to announce and give the listeners a sense of what was going on where Lindbergh was landing was the first human in human history to address more than, I think it was 10 million other humans. And that line, for whatever reason, just stopped me dead when I was reading the book. It was like, holy shit, we're babies. We're brand new with all of this stuff. And so people always going, well, it's human nature and it's going to be this and be this. Yes, absolutely. It's very difficult to fight against our base code and DNA in human OS. But by the same token, you're in a Cambrian-like explosion of video channels like yours, of new Substacks, of new podcasts. And we've gone from this idea of broadcast, right? I mentioned I Love Lucy, right? 63 million viewers was an average number of people watching I Love Lucy. And then you understand, well, of course, society seemed much more homogenous because everybody watched the same TV shows. There were 3 networks. There were 2 newspapers that mattered, and no one else existed, essentially, to this amazing, buffet of various views, fiction, nonfiction, etc. And I kind of think one of the things that's going to come out of it is going to be curation platforms are going to become really, really important, because I think that it isn't so much information. Information, we have too much information, man. It's the idea of what kind of information that you, as the particular type person that you are, or me, or anyone, go I love X, Y, and Z, so I'm going to go to this particular platform. Is that something you see emerging in your work as well?
100%. I really see my work as curation. I'm really just looking at a lot of different sources that I think work and trying to put it together on a topic. That's really just a type of curation. And I see what you just talked about, curation platforms, I think would be a huge product. I would be interested in them. I think, you had people watching Cronkite, and that was maybe too much of a reality tunnel. And then we have this explosion of maybe too many reality tunnels. And it's now going back the other direction to maybe be a little bit more ordered. And I think curation is going to be a big part of that. Absolutely.
One of the things that you do that I really love is you draw very broadly. You can go from Wittgenstein and Heidegger to Daffy Duck and Rick and Morty. And maybe that's motivated reasoning on my part, because I did an entire salon on Rick and Morty, Jed McKenna, and the meaning of life for my friends at Interintellect I've always told Anna she needs a new name because that's really hard to say.
Yeah.
But
I'm a big fan of Anna too.
yeah. But I wonder, like, do you ever get any pushback on that? Do you ever like? I hate dichotomies for the most part because I think that most of the world is gray and neither black nor white. But like, whenever somebody is like, well, you can't talk about what Wittgenstein said about suffering in the same tone of Rick and Morty, and I'm like, well, fuck you can't. They're talking about exactly the same thing. Like Succession is King Lear, right? And Rick and Morty is the hero's journey, except his story circle. And does anyone ever like? Well, that's not serious because you're bringing in the cartoons. Or another one you had that I loved was Mr. Rogers and the Power of Persuasion. Like I'd never thought about that, and when I saw it, I was like, God damn it, he's right.
I get pushback. I don't think I've gotten too much pushback for pop culture things. The only time I've ever seen pushback is when there are super fans of somebody and they say that, he meant something else. So in my David Foster Wallace video, I get pushback from super fans who are like, well, he didn't quite mean it like that. That happens occasionally. Or like in the Mr. Rogers video, I got pushback from some people who are like, he's not using these persuasive tactics on purpose. He's just being persuasive because he's a nice and kind guy. And so why would you bring him into this more persuasive, manipulative frame? And I think that's, I understand why they're coming from there. But whether Mr. Rogers meant to do that or not, it's kind of what he did. And that was the point of the video, is that maybe he just is so good at persuasive because that's just who he is. And he used these things really well. So, I get for YouTube, which tends to have pretty toxic comment sections. I find my comment section to be full of love and support, which is great.
That is great. What do you think about YouTube now? Do you think they're ready to be disintermediated, or are they going to continue to be the ones bringing the ruckus?
I think they've just got such great network effects. I don't know about the younger generation with how powerful TikTok is right now, but YouTube just has the network effects big time. And they did this thing where when they launched Shorts, which was competitor to TikTok, they, sent emails to all the creators saying, if you do Shorts, we'll do a 50% revenue share. So they're trying these things, and that's way higher than normal. So they're trying these things to get people to stay on the platform. And I think they'll probably be successful, especially with the US being more friendly with Google, obviously, than TikTok.
Yeah. In speaking of things that sometimes get push people's buttons, like I don't have TikTok on my phone. And for the very simple reason that I see it as an enormously powerful and successful brainwashing mechanism that's kind of run by the CCCP. And like, okay, I do see TikTok videos, right? Because people put them on Twitter.
Yeah, right.
but like the idea that, it made me think about it. Like you see all these people ban TikTok. You can't have TikTok. I don't know that I'm in that camp. Because I'm delighted that I live in a country that has the First Amendment. And the litmus test for free speech is you got to let people you utterly despise say what they want to say too, or you're not really for free speech. But what do you think about that? Because it sent me down a rabbit hole of, the kind of the Marshall McLuhan, the medium is the message. Do you see that like hyper short reel that TikTok has made so famous? Is that going to take over or no?
I think it already has. It really that short form content, those bite-sized snacks are. I work with youth in the summer, and it's definitely taken control of their attention spans. They are 1, 2, 3, 4, nothing too long. And yeah, I think the TikTok method is the norm now. And it's interesting. It's much harder to go from short to long than long to short. So once we're there, I don't know how you bring it back out the other way.
My thought on it is that, I kind of think, well, where can I get an edge? Where can I get an advantage? And I think that, and I mean that just sort of, I just like to do these puzzles, and I'm not talking about me specifically. But it does seem to me that the people who are going to do really, really well in the world have attention spans that are longer than a goldfish's. Are interested in a variety of things and willing to put the time, effort, and work in to understand those things. In other words, are we creating a world where we are significant? And I don't mean this in a conspiratorial way at all.
Right.
I don't mean there's some nefarious group up here doing it. I'm just saying, is it emerging that the majority of people are getting hooked on these really short form videos, and that in a way that's dumbing them down? And then there's this other group over here that is I love those too, but I'm going to spend a lot more time watching Will's 3-part series on happiness. What do you think?
I think the world is further dividing into those two camps, and we are creating, I think, as you said, unintentionally, this world. There's a great book that's sort of an ode to McLuhan and Postman amusing ourselves to death, called The Shallows. And it's somewhat of a pop science book, but it's all about this idea that the internet just is great for, broad strokes, but it really fails most of the time in terms of depth. And a lot of people are caught in the quote unquote shallows. And it's interesting. I find that Twitter for me is an incredible tool for idea discovery. But after I discover those ideas, I need to get off of Twitter in order to really go deep on them. And that is the extra step that everybody has to take. Because if I stayed on Twitter, soon those ideas are down the river, and here's a new set of broad ideas that I'm interested in, and we just stay in the shallows, So I think it's really important to jump out when you can, and I'm really interested in doing that and trying to bring some of that to the internet with my videos as much as I can. But
well, I think you definitely succeed at that. You certainly have one convert that you're talking to right now. But on that, what's interesting is I was not a YouTube guy, right? Yeah. And I have a lot of young people who work for me, and with this podcast in particular, they're like, Jim, you got to release this on YouTube. You got to release this on YouTube. And I'm like, I don't fuck YouTube. I just I why would I do that? Because again, talking about reality tunnels, my reality tunnel was I love music. And so I would often go to YouTube for checking out new music. But that was my kind of single use case for it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have one particularly persuasive young guy who works for me. He's like, just do me a favor. Just I'm going to send you some links, some YouTube links. Just watch what I send you and then tell me again that YouTube is bullshit. And so he was very clever and crafty because he knew what would immediately get me. But then what happened was I went down the YouTube rabbit hole and completely changed my opinion on YouTube. It's I went back to him and I'm like, Jesus, YouTube is a search engine, really.
It is.
And especially the thing that's great about it being a search engine is it's a search engine for knowledge, right? And things you want to learn about. And I'd never had that kind of paradigm in my mind. And once that got in there, like my use of YouTube skyrocketed because there are so many really, really fascinating things, people, ideas, etc., that you can discover via YouTube that you simply couldn't before. But then it kind of goes back to, now we're in an attention economy, something you did a video essay on. And what do you think about that? Do you have any rules for the way you follow that you dole out your attention?
I do. I have very strict limitations on particular websites. YouTube is an example. I have an add-on to my browser that blocks everything that's suggested. So for me, YouTube is a pure search engine. I only go there to watch something that I want to watch. I will not watch anything that is served to me. So that installation was great for me. I now go to YouTube very intentionally. On Twitter, I don't follow anybody directly in the app, but I have lists that I follow through different software. And so that is very helpful for me, separating my own tweeting, although I haven't done much of it recently, from following people. And I just try to really limit myself. I would say when I first read Amusing Ourselves to Death, Neil Postman's book, it really kind of almost shocked out of me the usage of streaming services, Twitter, YouTube, by about 50%, and really turned me back towards books, which I think was a good change. I'm very mindful of it, of how I use the different services. And I think it's important because otherwise the services use you.
Right. Yeah. And you're kind of back to McLuhan again, right? We first invent our tools, and then our tools invent us. I'm botching that. The idea of having the limits, I love the idea of not taking anything the algo gives you. I'm going to try that. That's very interesting to me. And lists on Twitter X. Let me ask you that. Are you excited about, everyone talk about a polarizing figure, right? Elon. So you either hate him, I'm leaving Twitter forever. And, you see the next day, there they are.
No way.
Yeah, no way. But with this whole new video thing he's doing, you ever see yourself going over there and putting your series there?
I do. I am not loyal to a platform. I am simply interested in a place that treats creators the best. So if Twitter creates a way of revenue and discovery that is better than YouTube, I have no qualms going to Twitter. There are sort of scary moments, I would guess, as a creator. Famously, Ninja, who was a famous video game streamer, went from Twitch to this thing called Mixer, which was Microsoft's Twitch, and it failed terribly. And then when he came back, he didn't have nearly as many people following him. So there are concerns, not that I'm any kind of ninja or anything, but there are concerns around, losing your audience once you try something else. And if that thing doesn't work, coming back is really tough. But I could see Twitter working out. I don't know too much about their plan, but I'd be loyal to something that just gives the best deal to creators.
Yeah, and that's kind of what we are trying to do with my new company, O'Shaughnessy Ventures, right? It's like we think that there's this huge cultural lag, and that people are thinking, oh, well, the old models work, right? Gee, they're perfect. No, they're not. They're collapsing. And not only are they collapsing, people are really, I think, kind of asleep at the switch. I'll give you an example. So under our infinite media vertical, we're doing a book publishing concern. It's really straightforward. The author's going to get 70% of the royalties. We're going to take 30. We're going to give the author a dashboard so that he or she can look every day as to how many of their books sold, where they sold. We're going to use AI agents on it that the author can say, either go full agent, and if you go full agent, it would mean, oh, Will's book just spiked in Omaha. We're going to send our agents to look for podcasts and Substacks that are there that might be interested in Will's book. And, oh, we found them. We're going to make an appointment for you to be on that podcast and then report it all back to you. Like, these tools have been around. Well, not all of them. The AI agents are relatively new. But, like, it seems to me that there's this huge gaping hole where you can do it. You can make loads of money as the publisher and yet still change the economics dramatically in favor of the creator. And I'm kind of aghast that this is the case in a variety of industries, not just book publisher, right? Which is notoriously, stiff and like and in a constant state of stasis and death. But like the thing that I found interesting about what you said is also the key to this matter. I think you said you don't care about the platform; you just want what's going to be best for you as the creator and your audience, right? I think like that is a basic thing that, yeah, I'm sure that there are some people who say, no, I'm a YouTuber until I die, right? That's a hill I'll die on. Well, go ahead, sure, die on that hill. But I think that the confluence of these things, in other words, creators finally have the greatest variance amplifier in human history, the internet, right? Now they also have tools that make things like publishing a book or doing video essays, etc., relatively easier than they certainly were like 10 years ago. And next up, we're going to have people like us, and I'm sure we'll have a lot of competitors, I hope, doing like, oh, well, why are we using that model when we can make a shit ton of money by just keeping 30% over here and we can give all this other amplification? And so I think that it's, you mentioned earlier that when we were chatting about attention, it seems to me that like in AI, what they did was, to be a real nerdy geek here, they maximized the objective function, which means what's our goal for revenue and clicks, right? Well, guess what? You can turn that dial over to creativity. You could turn that dial over to, brilliant essays, to a variety of things. And now we have that. And it just seems to me that it's going to be this, it's so cliche, but like a golden age for a diversity of thought, opinion, etc. Am I just a raving lunatic here?
No, I'm also quite optimistic about the future for creators. I know there are other people who vehemently disagree with me on that, but I really think that the innovation that different technologies are bringing about, and different, as you just discussed, models for creators to make a living, they're just going to grow, and people are going to get more creative with them. And I'm optimistic like you, Jim. I totally see it becoming more of a golden age.
I think that's what's gotten me kind of so excited about this. But it also kind of leads into another one of my favorite of your videos, and that was about our great friend Joseph Campbell and his Hero with 1,000 Faces. And then, of course, the story Circle that Hammond simplified that to. Like, if we're going to write a book about this, right? What would be the hero's journey of let's use you. You're a great creator. So how do you take your hero's journey in this new environment?
I think we talked about different, we talked about TikTok earlier being this different place, and how to get a leg up. And I think for me, being in a place of relative comfort right now, in having done YouTube since 2014, I feel the need to get a little uncomfortable and try a bunch of different things. Use social platforms a little more, integrate maybe shorts into my long form, and just try a bunch of different things to see where they go. Merch. I'm really good friends with another YouTuber named CoffeeZilla, and we discuss all the time the different places that we could go, and we like to challenge each other on different ideas. And I see him as really helping me through being a supporting character in the hero's journey. And yeah, just diving into darkness and seeing what I find, and shedding the things that fail and keeping the things that end up going well, and returning home.
There you go. You're searching for the patterns of that story circle, and then you're going to do great essays about them. In the one you did on, I think it was on Dan Harmon's Story Circle. It was, basically three things that you looked at. You looked at life, death, consciousness, unconsciousness, order, chaos. The one I'm really interested in is the order chaos. Talk to me a bit about that and how that informs your own work.
Well, I think stories in general are one of our most powerful tools to fight entropy. We dive into the chaos and come out with a more ordered existence, a lesson in how to fight the chaos. And really, cultures in general are collections of stories that we have, made to help us survive. And they are somewhat, they're structures of order against a crazy world out there. And so I find, order chaos is also I'm most interested in it, of the three as well. And it comes up so much in my work. It comes up in the Happiness series all the time. But stories in particular, I see them as the best way for us to fight entropy, because we go in, we figure out the problem and we solve it, or we go in and we realize the problem's unsolvable and we accept it. Both are a way of dealing with entropy.
Yeah. And that leads us right into the Happiness Trilogy, which I thought was absolutely great. Have you read Darren Brown's book on happiness?
I have. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, I thought it was great too. And I discovered it, it was just serendipity. We have a family Amazon account, and another member of my family had bought that book, and I'm like, oh, what's this? And I'm like, oh, serendipity. I love it. What spurred on? Because that caused a lot of changes. Looking at your prior work, then into happiness, right? So, first off, why were you drawn so significantly to the idea of happiness? It's because it's a rough one, man. It's really
it's so rough,
really hard. So that kind of goes into the too hard, which probably led to the long form. But I just have like a ton of questions. Let's go with the first one. Why was that one where you thought, okay, you know what, this one's gotta be this is a mini series and it's gonna be long form. Fuck all those 10-minute this needs the longer treatment.
Yeah, it was something that started to bother me in the around 2015. I noticed discussions of the subject were really everybody had common sense about this notion. I kept saying to myself, I think that's wrong. there are all these sort of things that people repeat about the subject. And I'm thinking to myself, I don't think that's right at all. I think most of what people are talking about here is actually wrong. And it really started to bother me so much so that I was really looking for someone else out there, particularly someone who's a well-known philosopher who put words to this. And I found him. His name's Dan Hebron, and I think he is probably the best living philosopher on the subject. And the way he was able to explain it really solved a bunch of things for me. And I said, wow, I need to do this. You had Derek Sivers on recently, and he said this thing, that's shallow happy, and I'm interested in deep happy. And that's exactly right. I wanted to find someone who explained deep happy, because deep happy doesn't explain much, but I wanted to find a philosopher who really took deep happy and explained it in depth. And I found him, and I said, I need to spread this. And I ended up, talking to him a bunch. He endorsed my work, and then I ended up connecting his work to a bunch of other research. And I said, oh, this thing's really exploded. I got to make a series out of this. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's drive some more viewers to the series and give us the tease on Deep Happy, so that our listeners and watchers the next thing they're gonna do after they listen to our entire podcast, right, guys? You're gonna listen to the whole thing. You're not gonna click over, but tease them on deep versus shallow.
Yeah. Well, if you just think about, a lot of people say definitions are not important, but I think a lot of those people haven't been hit by a definition so good that it's completely changed their life. And there's really three ways we talk about the word. The first is talking about satisfaction. So people say, I was really happy with that meal. Most people aren't chasing that's not the happiness most people are thinking about. It's an important type of happiness, but that's not the happiness most people talk about. Then, people might eat a really good meal or watch a really good movie and say, wow, I feel really happy right now. But then an hour later, it's faded. But then there's this third version of happiness that I was looking for and found. And it's a lasting one. It is meant to last weeks, months, if you're lucky, years. And the way it's explained is that there's multiple levels. So the Buddhists, they love to say this thing where, your emotions are like the waves on the ocean, but your center is actually the depth of the ocean. It's unchanged. And the depth of the ocean is what we're after with deep happiness. And then, the other stuff is icing on the cake. And the depth of the ocean are things like confidence, lasting tranquility, this concept that I love called compression versus uncompression, which is basically just how free do you feel? When people are stressed, their mind gets kind of narrow and they can only think about the one thing they're stressed about. But a really uncompressed person, usually a hiker, a ski bum, a Buddhist monk, the world is totally open to them, right? And you think of a compressed Westerner, getting to my next meeting. Those are the things that can actually be quite lasting for somebody. And they are a very deep happiness for that person. And then the things that are sort of a little bit more passing, but still important, are things like flow, which is really being super engaged with life, and exuberance, being really excited about life. I think of a Jack Black who's genuinely exuberant about everything. And then there's things that are, and this is where I think we take so many missteps on happiness, and why happiness is seen as kind of shallow, is that the most visible aspects of happiness are the most shallow aspects, which are sort of cheerfulness, laughing, joy. Joy can be a window into a deeper happiness, but it still tends to be a much shorter state than others. So those are the sort of deep happy states. And I think it's important to sort of think about them and figure out how you can find them in your life, because I think the lasting version is much, much more important than any of these other shallow and inauthentic notions we talk about in American culture.
Yeah, and I agree. The one that I really resonates with me is compression versus uncompressed.
Yeah.
Because that seems to have the broadest effect that I've seen, at least in one's overall life.
Yeah.
And do you think there's a way that people listening to us right now or watching us right now, like after they're done with us, is there a way that they can start or decompressing their life if they, like a typical Westerner, are in a pretty compressed life?
You know, the reason uncompression is maybe the trickiest one and so overlooked is because I would say it's one of the most environmental ones, in the sense that it's very hard to just get your mind uncompressed by just staying in your desk chair. Uncompression really is one of those things that comes to you when you are somewhere else. In fact, Dan Habron, the philosopher, one of the reasons he wrote the book is, he was this professor at this really well-known philosophy department, great success, thought he was happy. And then he went on this vacation and went surfing. And he's like, oh my God, I've been unhappy this whole time. And it was because he had this sudden uncompression, being in a different place, surfing, just watching the birds. And he realized, wow, I have been so stressed out. And I really think, unfortunately, it is one of those harder ones where you have to kind of change your environment a little bit or change your activities to something completely different. And I think not everybody loves the outdoors, but I really think the outdoors is a great way. Just expansive space, nature, uncompression and expansiveness are very similar. Uncompression's a tough one, but that's like the easiest one is trying to just change up your environment and be somewhere a little more relaxed. The other versions of it that are more individualized are probably a bit tougher.
The importance of your environment is really interesting to me because there's a lot of research that points to exactly the point you are making. That's like unhappy, stuck, whatever. Go someplace else. Do something else. Something that I used to do just naturally. I feel very lucky and very grateful that in under the terms that you conclude lead to happiness, I'm very happy. And one of them is this, and why I asked specifically about it is this uncompression. I'm very compressed. But I also wonder whether that was something that I just lucked into. And let me give you the example and see what your response is. I, for the longest time, had what my wife considered like a bizarre habit. And my bizarre habit was I would do things at random. And I really mean at random. Like I would flip a coin and let where it landed decide what I was going to go and do that day. I would go into Tower Records and buy 50 CDs literally at random just to see what was new and what was different. I would go to a bookstore. This is what really drove her crazy. I would just go and I would just grab books at random and buy them and read them. And she went like, you're not rich enough yet. This is when I was younger. You're not rich enough to be so fucking eccentric, Jim. You can't do that. But what happened was, I think, in a way, and I had this thought when I was getting ready to chat with you and going through your stuff and watching your stuff again and then reading my researcher's write-up. It's like, I wonder if that didn't lead to that, because it was kind of like the first thing. And by the way, I discovered for example, I was one of the earliest listeners to techno and house music back when it was called European New Beat. And the the only reason I was was because I bought several of those CDs randomly.
I love that.
And I'm like, wow, this is really good. What do you think?
I think that, there's probably some genetic or personality component where you're just naturally that way. And, when I think of the word compression, I also think, and this is why environment matters so much, a lot of compression is people kind of compressing your spirit, making you be a certain way. And so in that sense, it's kind of the sleep of individuality to be compressed. And so when you say that you're kind of eccentrically pulling things off the shelf at a whim, that sounds like you're just very comfortable being yourself and not worried about what your wife is thinking or what other people in the store are thinking. And that is just naturally going to lead to a certain kind of uncompression, definitely.
Yeah. And I'm fascinated by it because, like, I do think you brought up the idea that maybe that's just you, maybe that's a genetic predisposition, right? And I do wonder about that because I have told other people about this, and it's really interesting because most people's reaction is to give me this, and for those who are listening and not watching, I'm just staring. Like, you are so fucking weird, Jim. Why would you ever do that? And yet, when I was a kid, and literally I got punished for being smart. I was in a Catholic school. I'm 63, so this is back in the 60s, in the real dark ages. The 60s children of the 20th century, not the upcoming 60s. And they had this little SRA reading thing that basically it was a card. You read the card, you wrote up the answer to the question, and then you went on to the next one. And I loved reading, and so I read to the end of the thing. I not knowing that this was in third grade and that I had read all the way through the end of eighth grade. And so instead of sending me to the library, what did they make me do? They made me sit quietly with my hands making a Christmas tree at my desk when the other kids were doing the hour of the SRA reading.
Yikes.
Exactly, right? It's crazy. And so I went home and I'm complaining about this. And my dad goes, "Come here." And I went, "Okay." And so we walked into our formal living room where I grew up with books everywhere. And so he brings me over to the Encyclopedia Britannica. He takes out the A volume, gives it to me, and he goes, "Read these." But I did. And what was really cool is, and I'm trying to figure out a way to get people who didn't have that experience or whatever, just to naturally fall into that habit. So one of the things that happened there was I got so fascinated by some of the things that I was reading earlier, right? Like, A for Albania. Let's just take Albania. And that I did looked up. And back then there was no internet to figure this stuff out. My mom even complained to my dad. She was like, now he makes me take him to the public library all the time. But do you think you could do a course? Do you think that you could put together a series on YouTube whose net result would be at the end of it, somebody who went through it became more uncompressed?
I think so. Definitely. I think, the thing is it comes natural to you, but there are people out there who need it defined for them before they can even understand what they're doing. And so that's why the series starts out with the being kind of heavy on the philosophy and the definitions. But it's the practical stuff obviously is the most important stuff. And I do think it's possible. I would say, despite the fact that genetics are definitely a part of this whole thing, I would say they're pretty underrated, pretty overrated in terms of what changes you can make. And I would definitely like when you talked about reading the encyclopedia and getting interested in things. What's interesting to me there is that you did so kind of volitionally, even though your dad put it in front of you. You were the one that ended up being interested in things and going for it. And it's pretty clear in research on education and stuff that it's volition that leads to learning. And how we get to people to do things volitionally is, to me, the most important thing in the world, because that's how you actually create change. The brain isn't going to change if it doesn't feel volition doing what it's doing. So I think one of the big parts of the series, one of the big major sources of happiness is autonomy, and getting people to understand autonomy on a deep level and the ways it functions and how you can use it in your life to kind of become more yourself and less at the behest of your environment, the more uncompressed you could become. Definitely. Absolutely.
Yeah, and that makes me think of in another context. I used a quote from Kurt Vonnegut. Actually, it was John Irvine quoting Vonnegut. Something Vonnegut said to him when they were both teaching at, I think it was the Iowa School for Writing, and it was along the lines of, by all means, you can treat serious subjects. You can be a serious writer. But if you're going to be a serious writer, you also better be fucking entertaining. And like, that's what you do quite naturally. Like when I watched your video series, and yes, I did watch them all. But then I went back and rewatched in anticipation of our conversation today. You do it in what I think is exactly that right mix. In other words, I love the way you jumble up popular culture with heavyweight philosophers, with, kind of the full story, the way you looked at happiness. You went through all of the various views on it, which I thought was great because that gives context. And it just seems to me that you're right, though. But I wonder, is your ability to both be entertaining while you are educating, is that enough to get that person's volition engaged? You see what I mean? I'm looking for 100%. Kind of cause and effect, right? And I think maybe one of the causes of that volition would be the fact that, hey, you're very entertaining when you're doing your video essays.
I think you're absolutely right. If people think back to their favorite teachers, I guarantee you that they tend to be someone they really liked. And that made them more volitional towards the subject. Part of the reason I ended up loving history was because I had a string of incredible history teachers versus extremely boring math teachers. And right. Turns out math is my worst subject. Interesting. So I think it's very clear to me that entertainment matters, and likability, all these things that people don't think are important when learning about something are super important. It's just about the line where entertainment goes. So, edutainment has a line, I think, where you can go too far and then the education kind of stops. And people are more interested in what's his next joke going to be, or what's the next cutscene going to be. And I'm always trying to be very careful about that.
Yeah, and I think you do it particularly well. I don't know that there's a formula per se, but I am enamored of that idea that like your approach seems to me to be the winning formula, so to speak. That if you were going for, I honestly believe that we are approaching a time when great teachers are going to be able to make millions of dollars because they're they're one to many, right? Like that radio guy from the Bill Bryson book. If you now have the ability to educate and entertain, and then you can monetize that through YouTube or whatever platform happens to be the most beneficial to you as that educator, entertainer, the better. But that's what gets me excited about it. And so what are you excited about working on right now, in addition to everything we've been talking about. Like, what's the thing that is making you super excited to be getting it done?
I'm really interested in a couple. It's funny. Happiness is such this big topic, and then the next one I'm interested in is also this crazily huge thing called the free energy principle, and it's a theory about the brain, and it kind of lines up with a lot of recent brain research, and depending on who you ask, they might tell you it's the biggest theory since natural selection, but other people would say not even close. And it's from a British psychiatrist in the schizophrenia field, and his name's Carl Friston, total genius. And free energy is being used in AI systems as a concept because one of the umbrella terms for it is active inference, and the brain is just a prediction machine. So I'm super interested in the free energy principle and how it can describe so many different things. And again, it goes back, it's very relevant to the whole order chaos thing we were talking about earlier too. That's a project I'm really interested in. That's still kind of in the nascent stages. But I also took a break for a while because I had some health issues and I needed to make that my full-time job. And I'm kind of on the out on those, thankfully, finally. And I'm also, because I've taken this break, I don't feel tethered to any one particular style. I'd like to kind of be a little more exploratory while still making videos, some videos in the same way I used to.
You bring up the schizophrenia, and I know a little bit about the free energy principle, probably not nearly as much as you. But I remember reading one time about a speculative psychological theory about schizophrenia that essentially found that it posited that schizophrenia was simply filter failure. And that as you know, our brains and our minds can only process a very limited amount of information per second, for example. And, it's something like, I'm making these numbers up, so don't anyone say actually on Twitter. But we can, of the million that hit our perception fields every second, we can process 44 of them.
Yeah.
And that links to attention, things that you've already worked on. And that schizophrenia simply doesn't have that filter. And they're getting bombarded with all the 1 million. And guess what? Those are all the voices. Like, I love the book, All the Light We Cannot See. And I just discovered, I don't watch TV very often, but I was reading and I found that Netflix had made a mini series of this book. And I'm like, wow, I'm going to definitely watch that. and I did, and it was fun. But, it's the idea behind the free energy principle that could be like a 12-part series almost. If what I know about it is by the very little that I know about it, I can already get to 12. Are you thinking something grand and ambitious like that?
Pretty grand. And I may try and cut it down and just hit on the main points. We'll see. It's the way I do research is I really try and read everything first to get that bird's eye view. And I think once you sort of immerse yourself in the literature for long enough, you come to a point where you're like, I know how I'm going to structure this. It just comes to you. But you need to spend the time in it long enough. And I think it'll be interesting. I'm not sure I want to trudge through the same thing I did with the Happiness series. Like, it was a blast to make, but I don't know if I want to go straight into something else like that immediately. So we'll see. But I'm definitely interested in making something on that subject. And to go back to the sort of the filter failure, there's really interesting, especially in psychedelic research, about how maybe the paragon of mental health is mental flexibility. And part of the reason why psychedelics help is it maybe takes a brain that's too ordered, something that's hyper-focused on some maybe OCD or hyper-focused on something that's giving them anxiety, sort of suddenly opens that up and allows them more flexibility. And then on the total other side of the spectrum is schizophrenia, where it's way too open. And so it's really interesting to see these different sort of things come into consilience where maybe flexibility is the thing that everybody's after with the brain rather than something that's maybe a little too ordered, a little too chaotic. And I'm super interested in that just because in the same way I'm interested in happiness, I'm interested in mental health and all that kind of stuff. So,
yeah, as I said to you before we started recording, the challenge here might be that we're not going to disagree on anything, and we both have exactly the same interests because, I am fascinated by happiness. After reading Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind, I completely changed my mind about psychedelics. I grew up under the Nixonian lies of, this will fry your brain. And I believed it. I never would have touched a psychedelic when I was a kid because the propaganda worked. And then I read that book and I got to tell you, I was really angry because when you look into the real history of psychedelics, and the research, I'm a big supporter of MAPS. I'm a big supporter of professionally overseen psychedelic experiences for helping with mental health issues. The Johns Hopkins research is pretty bulletproof. A lot of other research coming online that, by the way, he details from all the research they burned. Literally, I mean, I just had the hardest time. Yeah, I mean, it's like almost a crime. Well, not almost a crime. It is a crime. It is a crime what they did, right? And even now, we're financing a movie about the experience of 5 separate individuals using psychedelic therapy through our Infinite Films division. And the stories, in some circumstances, are heartbreakingly sad, but then also heartwarmingly just oh my God, look at what happened from just 3 sessions with the medically supervised psychedelic therapy. And it just seems to me that I think you're absolutely right about your observation about a mind that is too rigid. That brings you back to Lao Tzu, right? And the Tao Te Ching. Being rigid and stiff is a disciple of death. Being flexible and supple and bendable is a disciple of life. And it does seem to me that we finally are creating a world and the tools in which we can make these connections make sense again. And that gets you back to the kind of curated platform, which I think, you would probably be really great at.
Oh, I appreciate that. And it would be really interesting to me. And I can just see the idea of multiple series connecting, kind of saying, maybe even having notes on the side saying, if you liked this episode, you should watch these curated things over here, because there's a lot of connection between these two things, All right, I'll stew on that, Jim. I like that.
Do. And you might even be able to contact a certain corporation, OSB.LLC, that might be very, very interested in that project.
Okay.
Well, listen, this has been absolutely delightful. I highly recommend all of your work to all of our listeners and viewers. You can find it on YouTube. And where else are you available to people?
My socials and my YouTube channel is just my name, Will Schoder, Schoder. You can find me pretty much everywhere through that name. And that's where you can find me everywhere.
Yep, that's what
I don't post on X much, but I plan on it. I'll be back.
Yeah. All right. Well, now we've come to the time where we are going to, in fact, make you the emperor of the world for a day. You can't. You know the rules. I think you can't kill anybody, and you can't send anyone to a re-education camp. But what you can do is we're going to hand you that magic microphone, and you can speak two things into it that you will incept the entire 8 billion population of the planet. The next day, whenever their day begins, they're going to wake up and they're going to look at their significant other and say, God, honey, I've just had two of the best ideas in the world, and I'm going to act on them today. What do you got for us?
The first one, I think, I don't know who wrote this, but it stuck in my brain so much, and I think about it all the time. And it's whatever keeps your brain in thrall doesn't necessarily do anything for your heart. I think about that all the time because there are so many things in the modern world that keep our brains in thrall, but our hearts still feel empty. And I think about, just seeking the things that make you feel like a fully formed human being, a whole person with full vitality, more than following the things that just keep you engaged and absorbed in the bad sense. There's good versions of absorbed and engaged, of course. And I guess the second comes from a mentor of mine, which was in life, not stories. The supporting characters are the main characters. And, just the people who drop everything they're doing to help, that pay attention even when they're busy, are kind to you, unselfish in friendship, thoughtful when you're having trouble, eager to bear your burdens. Those are the people we remember on our deathbed. And I think I think about that saying all the time. The supporting characters are the real main characters. And I guess I'll have to add a third because it's one of my favorite quotes of all time from one of my favorite movies, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. Be excellent to each other and party on, dudes.
I am going to allow a special dispensation for 3 inceptions. You are our first 3 inception guests because I also love that movie and I love that quote. Be excellent to one another and party on. That makes a lot of sense to me. Well, listen, Will, this has been absolutely delightful. I wish you the very best, and I will be watching very closely because I think you're on to something.
Thank you, Jim. It's been an absolute pleasure.